thank everybody who's with us, following on Facebook and also joining us live on Zoom as well. I'm Jake Mangas, President and CEO of the Reading Chamber of Commerce. We have developed this rapid recovery program as a result of the adverse effects of COVID-19 on businesses. This has been a multifaceted experience for us. I mean, we knew that businesses needed funding, so we've helped them with that. We know that they need connection to up-to-date information and resources, so it's been our effort to do that as well. One of the areas that we have heard has really had an effect on the workforce has been childcare. It's been family-friendly environments for customers, for employees, and also then how does that relate to policy development within businesses to help employers to be able to provide more family-friendly environments so that their employees can remain more productive and so that their customers feel comfortable having their families, their kids in your place of business. So I am pleased to be able to introduce to you Wendy Dickens. Wendy Dickens is the Executive Director for First 5 Shasta. She is an expert on this particular topic. First 5 Shasta is an agency dedicated to assuring the youngest members of our community and their families have all the systems put in place to build a healthy foundation in life. Prior to that, she worked at Shasta County Health and Human Services as program manager in the children's branch. She worked with the programs that included training for out-of-home care providers of foster youth, including medically fragile and drug-exposed infants and toddlers, licensing, adoptions, youth in intensive service needs, and youth who were non-minor dependents. She's got a career in HHSA children's services that spans more than 15 years. And I can tell you that she's also an active member of the Rotary Club of Reading. And she is also a local hero in another way. She is a volunteer firefighter on the front lines of things like the August Complex and all of these others that we've heard about during our fire season. So with that, we are in the presence of greatness. Wendy Dickens, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you've really, hopefully I can live up to all of those things. And I really appreciate you having me on today and to talk about this very important topic, because I think, you know, sometimes during these heavy periods of time in life, we can kind of forget, you know, some of the focus, and hopefully this can bring back some of that focus that I think, you know, we all need to try and share and support one another in. So thank you very much for that very, very wonderful welcome. So
you got it. And Wendy, I want to also encourage everyone who's with us either on social media, which we will monitor the comments and questions there, or those that are with us on Zoom. If you have questions, please just unmute yourself and ask. And we want this to be really free-flowing conversational. So go ahead, Wendy.
Yes, definitely. So as you mentioned, Jake, and for everybody else, I am with First 5 Shasta, and First 5 Shasta, for those of you who don't know, is funded through Proposition 10 tobacco tax revenues. And it was really approved through California voters in 1998 to try and help establish some things around the 0 to 5 population, all the way from prenatal care through kindergarten readiness, where there might be gaps in services or needs for support, so that we could really be looking at how to develop the children that their brain needs to have in order to be successful later on in life. And so really those first 5 years of life, we know, is one of the most profound areas of development. And not that you can't teach old dog new tricks later, it just takes longer. And if you can put a lot of work on that foundation early on in that brain, we know that we're going to get better outcomes from the youth that we have. And this is kind of just to show some of that. So, you know, for people who may not understand why that's so important, this really is kind of displaying the brain activity even pre-birth. So at 36 weeks gestation, you're already learning things from hearing outside the womb, what's going on, what's happening inside the womb, if the mom is, you know, eating healthy, if the mom is able to, you know, keep her stress levels at a normal kind of activity level. And then when you're born, you are born with some of those synaptic connections already developed. And then as you go through time, you explode with synaptic connections, you know, and that's why they do things over and over again. Through the first years, they do that drop game, and then they're building all of that. And then at about 5, into 4, early 5, into the 6-year-old age, you start to prune away what you don't need, what you don't learn, what you don't have the necessary requirements to continue on. And this is all important because I think this is why supporting families throughout the community and including as a business, whether it be your consumers or whether it be because you are an employer of someone with a young child or even a teenager, why this is going to be necessary for you to continue to support that behavior. So just a little bit about me, because I think it's important to have some kind of crux. And you heard a little bit already from Jake, you know, that I do some volunteer firefighting. I, you know, bowl, I'm a Rotarian. You know, part of getting to know what is important in your community is getting to know your community. And as an employer, it's also important to get to know your employees. And the reason for that is to figure out what the true policy needs are around your particular you know, agency or company. And so, you know, this is part of my story. This is a part of my story that I enjoy. And these are the things that I enjoy in my time away from the office. And it could be why I take a vacation, or it could be why I need additional support. And I work for an agency that is amazing and understands the importance of other community service, such as doing volunteer firefighting. And these are my beautiful children, who are the reason why I do what I do, and the reason why I work so hard, as well as the passion that I have. And they're part of the reason I have the passion I have. And so, you know, they are a part of my story as well. And getting to know me, if you were my employer, and knowing their ages and knowing what needs they might have, are going to be not necessarily a reason for you to give everything to me, but also will help you, though, understand why I might be in a certain space when I come to the job, or why I might need certain things happening. And so how many of us as employers know about the children that our employees have? And I'm not saying you have to know every detail, but do you at least know their names and ages? Can you ask how the weekends went? Because those are all important. Relationships are the basis for everything. If you want to have good morale, then having a relationship with your staff is one of the key ways to making sure that that happens. So the other thing is, if I begin to talk too quickly, make sure that you yell, "Hey, slow down. I don't understand a word you're saying. You're speaking so fast." So all of that is just to kind of lead into this discussion around child and family friendly businesses. And a piece of why this is important, we're going to kind of weave throughout this. And I'm going to weave in why this is important for the staff, why this is important for patrons, why this is important for the community. And the one big thing that isn't listed right there on this particular slide is why it's important as an employer. But that's really going to be one of the biggest pieces of this conversation. And the focus really today is to talk about the importance of all of these things, and to mention how we as a community need to grow and build each other, as well as develop and make sure that businesses are flourishing, right? And we know that during these times of COVID, that can be of some concern, not just because you have employees who need a little bit more of a flexible scheduling, or you have a business that can't be open currently. We need to figure out what we can do to help with some of the support to make sure the community continues to flourish. There are going to be challenges, not just around COVID issues, but also around some of the other pieces and parts of trying to develop policy around child and family friendly businesses, possibly. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well, and hopefully have some good conversation. So what is a family-friendly employer? So as an employer, what does that mean to be family-friendly? It really means that you have a work environment and policies that really allow for your employees to have a balance between their work and their family. And it used to be that you just worked, and people said, leave your home at home, leave your work at work. But we know that through research and through reality, even for ourselves, that is not something that our brains really have a great accomplishment in doing, right? You know, something can affect you at work, and it takes a little bit for you to get done with it before you get home, because you're processing. And so really understanding we also need to have a balance in life so that we can be healthy, and so that it doesn't affect our health is also important. So flexible working arrangements are often something that can happen when it's a family-friendly employer, with, you know, the outcomes becoming something that's both positive for the employer and for the employee. And then policies that help individuals achieve that productive work-life balance.
So Wendy, I was listening to a podcast through the Chamber Association that I belong to, and they were talking about a similar topic where the CEO was being interviewed, and she said, it hit me right between the eyes when one of my staff members said, is it okay if I work from home today? And this was well before any pandemic. Is it okay if I work from home today because my computer is much faster at home, and I'm more productive at home? And so the CEO said, wait, there are two things wrong with that. Why are you more productive at home? And why is your equipment better at your house than it is at the office? And then the discussion went on, and she elaborated and said, well, you see, I've got things at home that I always have on my mind, and knowing full well for myself that everything is okay allows me to be more productive as an employee.
Yeah, I think that's an important, you know, thing to think about. And I was going to talk about it a little bit in the future, so I will again. But I think your point too, sometimes when you're at home, you are more productive. And I know that some people don't believe that. I think there are positions, and my staff specifically are very productive. And I have ways of figuring that out. I don't need to hover over them to figure that out. I can tell by what they produce to me and how long it's taking them still, right? Even if I'm not right there with them, they still have to give me updates. They still have to provide me with finished documents. They still have to do the job that they're required to be doing. So I still can tell if they're being productive or not. And I can tell in the creativity that some of them are much more productive at home because they're not worried about things at home, specifically children. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I think it's great that people are recognizing that there is an issue if you're more productive at home, maybe, and there could be some things that you can do to you know, help with some of those pieces, but also recognizing that there might only be because if you get to work from home, that's more helpful to you as an employee. The importance of being a child-friendly business really goes back to some of that morale that we just were kind of talking about. You're going to have a better morale from a person if you are a little bit more flexible and allow them to work from home on occasion, if they're feeling more productive there. Of course, not being willy-nilly about it, but definitely building it in. And First Five has definitely had that opportunity for folks since I was before me, and I've been there for 4 years. So we've always had the ability to work remotely. So it wasn't a huge shift for us to necessarily go to an at-home work environment regularly. However, it is nice to be together as a team. And so it would be wonderful to be back in the office more often. However, we also have always had the ability to have flexible work schedules. For business owners, you're really going to look at a return on investment if you're really investing in your employees in a multitude of ways. And that doesn't just mean having flexible work schedules, but we'll talk a little bit about that. There's a Heckman's theory of that return on investment that he really talks about. He's a Nobel he's a Nobel Prize winning in economy. And he talked about the return on investment if you invest in children young, which means investing in their families really, right? Because children don't live without parents typically at the age of 4 or 5. They have some care provider, right? So, and it's really going to keep your valuable employees and reduce your costs, right? If you don't have turnover all the time, you're not training all the time, and people don't realize how much training costs. If you're continually and regularly training people and there's a turnover, and that same, you know, it can take you a while to fill that position. So then you're stressing yourself out trying to fill the position, or you're stressing other staff out to try and meet the demands of whatever position has been vacated. And now you're training someone again. And then just as soon as you train them, they leave. That's not necessarily effectively going to be it's not going to be cost effective. So for employees, it's really going to start to recognize their needs. And we'll talk a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs later on, but it can really help reduce stress as well, especially if you're thinking about that person that you mentioned, Jake, that was like, if I'm at home, all of those things that are on my mind are not on my mind, and then I can focus better because I'm not thinking about and distracted. Plus it reduces my stress, and it can really strengthen those family relations, which we need to have if we're going to build some strong families in our community. And we'll talk a little bit about the adverse childhood experiences we have and why that lends itself to needing to have more family-friendly types of businesses. And it just allows for employees to have more choices in what's happening in their lives, which when we have choices, it often reduces stress, it provides us with some morale, and keeps us a little bit healthier. And then for customers, because it's not just about making sure your employees have family-friendly access, it's really about, making sure your customers have accessibility to a changing table in both the men's restroom and the women's restroom. Women are not the only one who provide for their children, and they shouldn't be disallowed to take, or the dad shouldn't be disallowed to take a child into the restroom to change a diaper. So, and then it's going to build in those repeat customers with young families, because they are going to know that they can go to this, business and have something for their child to do, or not feel bad about having their child there, or have the things that they need in order to make the experience nice for all of them.
I think you're right on with that. I mean, how many of us know, like, oh, if the kid has to go to the bathroom, this is a place where it's okay. Or if we need to change a diaper, we know that this particular store does a good job, but this one, I wouldn't be caught dead in that place, because the bathroom's disgusting or whatever it is,
Right.
I wanted to also ask you a question, or maybe make a statement. We'll see how it comes out. I heard years ago that generationally, we're seeing in today's workforce, as far as millennials and beyond, the desire to have flexibility in their job is nearly, or maybe even more important than even the wages that they earn. Have you heard any of that in this context?
Yes, actually, we've talked a lot about it at some of the state meetings I've been at. Part of it is that is a piece of this, the millennials specifically and beyond, as wanting to make sure that they are living a more balanced life than they've seen their parents live. And it's probably been promoted by their parents as well, right? But they definitely feel like a flexible work environment is going to meet them and feed them in a way that's not going to happen if they're at a location that's not quite as flexible. And you see that in the trending as well, as far as, what kinds of occupations people are going for when they try and get a trade school, or try and go into the higher level education. So some of those pieces are really important to recognize. And I know that when I was leaving child welfare, one of the things we talked about was that some of the people that were starting, not only was it a very, hard job at times, there were people who, they were there for 2 years, and that was kind of what they wanted to do. They wanted that experience under the belt, and they wanted something that was a little bit more flexible for them, and to move on to a career that allowed that. So I think as we're moving forward, having your business, and I know some businesses that have a better conduit for this, but just knowing that and having that in the back of your mind, and maybe being able to shift your business practices a tiny bit so that you can cater to that, because I don't see that necessarily changing. And not that people don't have to do what you need them to do when they're working for you, or that you don't need to still try and find the right fit for your business, but you're going to see a lot of the younger generation trying to have a little bit more flexibility. And some people are viewing that as a lack of discipline or a lack of commitment to work and working hard. But I have seen just as hard workers in that particular generation. It's just they want the flexibility as well. So they want to be able to work hard, but they also want to be able to play hard. So I think that was a great point, Jake. So this, what you're seeing right now is really just the representation of that rate of return to investment in human capital. So when we're looking at a return on investment as a business person, we are always looking at what can we do to get the best rate of return as we go through things. Well, there is also a return to our investment on our employees, right? On our human capital. And sometimes we forget to look at that, and we don't recognize it as just as important. But again, it goes back to, do we need to fill positions a little bit more often because we're not as flexible, or we're not as family friendly, or we're not, keeping people because we don't have policies that allow for a good work-life balance. And so this, though, talks a lot about how we need to really be targeting as well the early years of a child. So this came from James Heckman that I talked about earlier, and how we need to really be focusing on some prenatal programs and programs that target those earlier years, so that as we go forward, we don't have to invest as many dollars in schooling and job training, because there is a greater, not that we don't have any investment, not that we don't continue to invest, but that we front load our investment, right? So if we are front loading our investment in families who have young children, the outcomes for us as business people are also going to be a better return on investment, because we're going to have consumers and employees later on in life that are going to do better for us as well. So I think that's just one of the points that I wanted to make sure we made, as far as like being family friendly, helping families who have a younger family and as their child grows and develops. We also know that high quality birth to 5 programs for disadvantaged children, and I would say that sometimes we have a pretty depressed economy here for a variety of reasons. We have a lower socioeconomic status in a lot of ways, regardless of COVID. But we can get a 13% return on investment. That's huge. That's a huge return on investment. And so if you're investing in families early in your policies or your practices, or whatever that looks like for your business, you're going to get that return on investment later on. And making sure that parents, the big piece is making sure that parents have the ability to support their children as they're developing and growing, especially in that 0 to 5 year, is important. And that's going to give you the 13% return on investment. Again, just, showing the comprehensive quality learning, and gives us better outcomes for for both male and female brains. And knowing that this investment means that we're reducing healthcare costs overall. So knowing that if we're investing in a family younger, you're also getting a return on investment through helping with lowering blood pressure, lowering drug use. So you're going to possibly reduce crime later on. You're going to get more education out of females. You're going to get higher adult employment income. And that raises your community, right? That raises your community up, it builds your community, and later will create a community you want to stay in or have your grandchildren and children be in. So I mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs earlier on, and this is important because I think people may or may not know that there's kind of a process that we as individuals, all of us, go through without kind of even being awares, right? So when we have our physiological needs met, when we have our food, we have our water, we have our shelter, we have a place to sleep, we don't have to worry about where we're going to sleep at night, we can then move on to thinking about other safety issues. So we can think about, our employment. We can really concentrate on our employment. We can then, think about where we need to be next and move forward in our lives. But when we're always trying to worry about where to sleep and where to eat, we aren't able to really be successful in employment. And then once we have the safety down, once we have that piece down, then we can really become more self-actualizing and moving toward that. And you can have a better self-esteem. You're going to see that you have people who, feel belonging. And it kind of works in the reverse way too. If a community throws away people or doesn't have investment in their employees, then their employees are still, again, not going to have that safety need met. And then it's harder for them to stay with an employer. So I think it's just important to recognize that with our adverse childhood experiences, in this community, a lot of people are not at that safety space yet. So it's really hard for them to concentrate or be present without some other type of intervention or support. And again, when we go into talking about the ACEs later, it's not a way of dismissing behavior or permitting poor behavior. It's a way of understanding it and then being able to maybe respond differently, or at least be thoughtful about what policies we have in place and how to then be a little bit more flexible and nimble. So some possible challenges, though, are really within those ACEs and not having people who are able to reach a little bit higher in that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And, you know, for employees, there's going to be a plethora of challenges getting to work, maybe. And if they don't have a place where that's family friendly, and, you know, you have a boss who doesn't allow when you call in and say, hey, my kiddo's sick, and you give that person a really hard time because their child's ill. And, you know, there for a while, I think it was, you know, not as well known around staying home. And now people are like, well, people are just saying they have COVID to stay home. And that may or may not be true. But the bottom line is that we have to start to understand that giving someone a hard time because their child's ill or they're ill isn't going to be helpful to staff morale or keeping that employee. And again, you're going to have some turnover. For businesses, it's really going to be keeping staff, some of those challenges, and then maybe possibly even in, you know, consumer, you know, accessibility. So just, you know, kind of, we'll talk through that a little bit as we move forward in this.
Interesting that you mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because a couple years ago, we looked at it from the standpoint of what makes, if the top of our pyramid as a community is to have a strong, vibrant community, then how do we build to get to that point? And so we had things like maybe foundationally was, and it really rings true with what you showed, that we have a safe community. And then the next level up would be a healthy local government that's able to provide basic needs for people in the community so that you feel safe and cared for and so on. And then I would probably throw in nonprofit organizations in that as well. Then you've got a strong business environment. And then finally, it builds up to the things that are more fun, like, you know, arts and premier recreation and those types of things. And then we've got this strong, vibrant community on the top of that pyramid. So I think there really are some parallels, and that probably dovetails great into this next slide.
It totally does. Thank you, Jake. It's as if we planned it. So this slide does demonstrate kind of the reverse of that, right? Like, so this demonstrates kind of the adversity that we can experience. And, you know, for those of you who may not have heard of adverse childhood experiences, they're often called ACEs. And we actually, when we did a random polling of the people who lived here in Shasta County, the rates were sometimes double, triple that of the state average. So we know we have a lot of adverse childhood experiences here. We know that they are something that affect a lot of different things in a person's life. And we know that that means that we as a community have to respond differently, because if we have as many adverse childhood experiences as we do in our community for a variety of reasons, then we need to be looking at what do we do to make sure that we're mitigating them for future generation, or mitigating them for current generation, and then preventing them for future generations, which is one of the things First Five likes to delve into, is prevention. So really, these adverse childhood experiences revolve around divorce, mental illness, incarceration, domestic violence, emotional and sexual abuse, substance abuse, all of those pieces. And then we also know, though, that sometimes adversity is rooted down in your community in a different way. And it can be based on poverty. It can be based on some lack of opportunity for economic mobility and social capitalism. And we know that, unfortunately, right now during COVID, that is particularly true, right? So we already had some traumas going on. We had the car fire, which is a part of that community trauma. Now we have COVID on top of the car fire, and just some of that trauma that kind of underlies. And then you even have some that go back generations that we may or may not want to, you know, recognize as being part of that historical trauma. But we do have historical trauma through the generations. And it's, you know, as a business owner and or an agency, an organization that employs others, it's important for us to know about these things and to at least recognize that they have some lasting effect on people. And then we, not again giving permissions for ill behavior, but we have a due obligation to, respond in a way that's going to be helpful rather than hindering. So, and a big piece of this, I just feel, is that community resilience, which you talked a little bit about already in that Maslow's hierarchy, is what we all want, right? We want a thriving community, and we have to build resilience in our community for that to happen. So this is just a little bit more about, ACEs, and I won't go deeply into it, but there really are 3 categories that are looked at in the original study. We know since the original study, there's been a lot of addition to what could be considered adversity in a childhood. But these original kinds of categories came from these 10 types of adverse childhood experiences, came from a study through Dr. Folletti and Dr. Anda. And one was with Kaiser Permanente and one was with the CDC. And they recognized that through these 17,000 participants, these particular sets of issues that were happening for all of them. And what we know from that is that these folks were, most of them high school diploma or higher, particularly mostly white, and, in a upper or middle socioeconomic status. So ACEs are prevalent and they are with everybody. They're not just, those people across the tracks that people like to say. It's really, you could be sitting next to someone who has had adverse childhood experiences and has built resilience. So I myself have 8, and I'm a very successful person. So it's not that if you have ACEs, you can't be successful or you have to, bend over backwards for people, but it does mean that we as a community and as a business owner or employer need to be recognizing adverse childhood experiences and then doing something to help prevent them for the future. And if we do that, then we are going to have less absenteeism within our employees because they are not going to necessarily have some of the other medical issues. We're going to have less crime. We're not going to have people who are using illicit drugs as often or committing suicide, which is one of them. And when we have employees who have life dissatisfaction, we also know they tend to call in sick more often. And so if we can prevent ACEs or mitigate the current ACEs, then we're going to be able to get rid of this oil slick slide that we have right here. This is the oil slick. And if you button up it right here with ACEs, then you prevent it from getting further out. Oops, it went the wrong way. Oh, wait, maybe I didn't. Okay, so how can you be child and family friendly? So for employers, for your employees, having policies that allow for some flexibility, and again, some businesses, are more conducive to that than others. Restaurants, you kind of still need to have some, you have certain hours. It's a service delivery. So things may not be the same when you talk about flexibility, but it could still be built in, right? You obviously aren't going to have people working from home necessarily in certain positions, right? Certain positions also lend themselves to having that type of flexibility. But this could also mean that when you're developing benefits packages for your employees, that you're looking at ones that allow for cost savings for childcare or a cafeteria plan. So having those kinds of policies in place and allowing employees for you to pick benefit packages that allow for that are going to be helpful for that as well. And then for customers, you really looking at your environment. We mentioned earlier, just having, the ability as a dad to take your child into the restroom and change them in the restroom is huge. So having the ability to, as a parent, either as, the female parent or the male parent, being able to take them into a restroom and change them. So there's still, it's of a wonder to me. There are still restrooms in this community that don't have in either area a changing table for young kids. And so how much do they want me to come to their business if I have a young child, and or how often are my children going to want to go there? Because then I'm not as comfortable in their presence there either, right? So we do have some examples that I was going to talk a little bit about. For employees, First Five Shasta, we have the ability to be a little bit more flexible. So we have a flexible, even when we're in the office full time, the ability for you to work remotely. Again, it's not willy-nilly. I need to know what you're doing and what days you're planning on doing that. But sometimes it's better for you to be home and working. But we also developed a policy where if you have a baby and you're coming back from maternity leave, you can have your baby with you until that baby's 9 months old or walking, whichever comes first. And then, you have to have, made some arrangements for them to be elsewhere after that in childcare. And part of the reason we did that is obviously we're a 0 to 5 and we don't have on-site childcare. The baby's with you as an employee. So they've set their offices up to be conducive to that, but they've also been super productive because they're not worrying the whole time they're away from their young baby about their baby. And they feel like at the time that they have to start to allow their child to be in care of someone else, that they're safer because they're not just this young baby who, and they also feel like they're bonding, and they're bonding more with their baby during this time as well. MD Imaging had a particularly wonderful idea around having some on-site childcare. As COVID was hitting, they were talking about for essential employees, because that's what they have, they wanted to be able to provide, the support for them to be, there and have their children there on site. And I know that, I don't know if that was able to come to full development, but I do know that one of the local foster family agencies is doing that. So their staff bring their children who aren't in school and provide them with the opportunity to, have them on there, and that this youth and family. For customers, I want to really highlight the Cascade Theater. They're one of the first that I know of that put a changing table in, and I know I said it like 14 times, changing table. It's just a huge deal. And, as a dad, I can only imagine not ever being able to, if you've taken your child out on your own, because you should be able to do that, not be able to change your child without putting them on the floor, which is disgusting and, sometimes necessary, right? So, because there isn't a changing table. So I think, I give a lot of kudos to Cascade Theater for that. Red Robin has a wonderful little play area to wait for, your table, and it provides opportunity for, and this is just a simple thing for a business to do. It's not expensive, but it caters to the customer, right? They have the, chalkboards for kids to play on. They have a very nice seated area. It's kind of out of the way, so moms can go back there or dads can go back there, whoever's care providing for the child, aunt, uncle, sister, brother, into that little area and play and keep the child entertained and have fun while waiting for a table. Black Bear Diner, any a lot of they have the jukebox the kids can go look at and pick different things going on. And then you also have the ability for them to draw on their and color. A lot of restaurants do that. And then Turtle Bay Museum, they do a wonderful job of making sure the exhibits that come to them are family friendly, that they bring in exhibits that are going to draw families, not just adults, which some museums are really set up more adult like. They make sure that families of all ages and types can come and enjoy different types of arts, different types of experiences around the things that can be brought as exhibits. All right, so that was really what I had as far as my, I'm going to stop screen here because I feel like it's, the last thing I did want to just kind of mention is that it really isn't enough to be compassionate. You must act. And I think this fits for me really and is important to me, because I think that this is something that is true for every facet of an individual's life. If they want a thriving community, if they want a thriving business, and if they want to have, the type of environment they want to live in be one of strength and opportunity, right? So you can be compassionate all you want to be, but if you never change anything or do anything to, mitigate something, it isn't enough. You have to act, and that can be done through policy. That can be done through making sure that you're being flexible as an employer, or even just, recognizing that it's hard sometimes to be a parent of a young child, especially if you're parenting without another person. And, just making sure that we're acting in a way that we know is going to help somebody rather than put them down. So I welcome any kinds of questions, or do you have anything else, Mr. Mangas?
Yeah, there is. I mean, great job, Wendy. I think that you really laid that out well for us. It was very thorough, and I learned a lot myself. I do have another question, and then I'll stop asking questions. One is, in terms of the policy development itself, do you have either like a repository of family-friendly policies that you've seen, or a website that people could go to, or local referrals that you think, reach out to this entity and they can help you with that development of these types of policies?
So I think there are some things you can look at online through a Google search, but we can also start to put together some things on our webpage. First Five California does have some information on their specific website. People may not be aware that First Fives are located in every county. And then there's also First Five California, who's supposed to support the state through talk, read, sing, etc. But they also often put, family-friendly type policies up on their webpage. And I'm happy for our First Five to also do that, just because I think it is such an important piece of how we get to being family-friendly.
Does anyone else have a question for Wendy? I had another one in mind, but it kind of drifted away. Oh, Erin, you got to unmute yourself real quick.
There we go. I'm thinking about what it means to be an employer, what it means to have employees, and I have a very close frame of reference for Jake's style of leadership. And, I have to say he's done such an amazing job at all of this throughout the pandemic and before. And, it helps that Jake has young children as well. So it's really relatable for the two of us when we have, things come up. But I think the main thing that makes, Jake such a great leader is the level of trust that he's able to place into his employees, and the fact that he's a very empowering boss. It's just his leadership style. So what would you say to employers or business owners that maybe have a little more trouble letting go of the constant oversight that can happen when everyone's working together in the office? How can employers increase their level of trust in their employees and feel more comfortable empowering them to have that flexibility?
That's a great question, Erin. And I don't pretend to know all the answers, but I think one of the things that I would suggest is that we make sure that we're just setting in more regular check-in times, right? So if you feel like as an employer, your staff is not being productive, they're not doing what you need to do, you have more regular check-in times, you have deadlines, and you are then making sure that those deadlines are being met, and and maybe asking more frequently initially for some intermittent reports rather than waiting until what you would have done in the office, right? Because, I tend to not, and I see Liz Poole is on here, and she's the deputy director for First Five, but, and she can speak up if I'm misstepping, but I tend to not be a micromanager. So for me, it's not as hard. I hire people I know, and we've built a team that we know are doing the job that they were hired to do. And I trust in them to do that until they prove to me that they aren't doing it, right? And so by just that, I believe that they are more willing to do what they need to do because I've already trust that they're doing it, right? But I think if you're an employer who's been burned and you feel like that isn't the truth, with an individual, then you set up more regular check-ins via Zoom or in other ways via email. We have, email is a wonderful handy tool in certain situations, and that's one of them, right? Is to check in around progress. So just looking at progress, I think, is going to be helpful in that regard. So that would be one of the suggestions I have. I'm sure there's others, and maybe Jake has some, and maybe even Liz.
I would just concur that definitely building that trust takes a little bit of time, but taking steps and having a plan to, give more freedom and independence as a new employee starts to build their time with your company or your organization. And, we work as a team, and I think that helps also with building that trust and building those relationships. We're not just working one-on-one with our director, but we're all working as a team. And so there is some accountability that's built into that as well, that really helps support those relationships and support the work. Even as we're all working remotely, we're all spread all over the community right now, working from home. But we're still able to work, and we still have accountability to each other, whether we're face-to-face or in this virtual workspace right now.
That's a really good addition there, Liz. And I think one thing that came to mind was we've seen businesses be able to make quick shifts in the way that they operate as a result of the necessity of doing so because of the pandemic. Do you think how has COVID-19 helped in this arena, Wendy?
Well, I think it's kind of forced people to have to do that, right? Because it's required some flexibility, even from people who may not have had the same ideas around these pieces and parts. And I think that in some organizations, they've figured out that remote working has been productive and is going to reduce overhead cost, right? Because they don't have to necessarily continue to spend money on getting bigger and bigger leases for buildings, because they know then they can maybe, even once COVID is over, return to a more flexible work schedule where some people are working from home, and then they rotate each other out so that they're not necessarily having that type of lease obligation. So I think that I've heard that through the community that now we're looking at, and I know in the bigger cities, some of the very large corporates are looking at that as well. Like, oh, we've been doing just fine working from home, and we don't always have to be together. And that's going to reduce our overhead cost because we're not going to have a lease to pay. Or we can, if we own the building, lease out that space because we don't need to use it. So now we have an income in addition to what we're producing for the community. So I think, there's been some shifting in mindset that has happened due to COVID. So there's some silver linings for COVID in some ways. And I think that's one of those.
Now, this may drift a little bit more into health and human services and away from business, but I want people to also hear the story of the antidote to adverse childhood experiences. Can you talk about protective factors and what we can do as a community of business to help people who have experienced adverse things in their childhood?
Jake, you speak to my heart. So this is just a passion of mine, obviously, and coming from child welfare into the first 5 realm where we get to do do preventative work. The 5 protective factors really are about building, relationships, making sure that children have those relationships, making sure parents have connectivity to their community and connection to somebody who can provide them with supports during times of need. And we, really can, as a community, just by recognizing our neighbors might be having a hard time, reach out and say, hey, how's your day going? What do you need? And simple relationship building is of the key and utmost importance, right? So relationships, that's going to build the 5 protective factors. If we show we care and we genuinely do, then it's going to be helpful as we move forward in building resilience for our community. And so it's just a simple act of kindness, there's just, but there are some lists. There's the 40 developmental assets you can look up online. And it's just one thing you can do a day. And, one of the things that we hear from youth who, have had adverse childhood experiences, and even for myself, you can pick out the people in your life that meant something to changing your trajectory, right? Like you knew because they said and took some interest in you, what they said to you and how they helped you help form your life differently, right? So definitely, as businesses, we can do that with our employees, and as businesses, we can do it with our patrons. So I think, you know, just knowing, reaching out, showing that is going to be helpful in mitigating and preventing future ACEs, because if we can support the families as well, then we know that their children are not going to necessarily have as many ACEs as they move forward. So, and that's what we want, right? We want to continue to reduce the number of ACEs that a person experiences over time.
Yeah, stop that cycle. Any other questions from anyone on the panel? Then I am going to kind of wrap this up, I think, and say that we are going to keep our membership and our constituents up to date on this particular topic, and we'll work closely with you, Wendy, on it. If people want to visit first5shasta.org, they can do so. It's first, the letter, or the number 5, the letter. Yeah, I need to go back to my first 5 years. Anyway, first, number 5, shasta.org. And you can get a lot of resources there, not only for children, families, but probably some that you could apply to your business. And Wendy, any final words?
No, just thank you very much. I think, you know, if we can, you know, help each other and support each other during this COVID time, you know, and then into the future, I think we'll be a lot more thriving in our community. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Wendy, for everything you do for our community. And I mean, everything you do for our community. On behalf of all of us at the Reading Chamber of Commerce, we appreciate you and everyone who's been able to join us today, and will watch this recording on Facebook. And we'll probably revisit a related topic in the near future through our Rapid Recovery program. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.